Hello and welcome to You Are the Question, the show. And I am Corey Edmund Engelot here for the One Great Work Network.com. And also with my channel, Nature is the Answer, and teaching more about natural law, I have a special guest today, somebody who produces content as well, somebody who is very active, daily posting, always putting out great stuff that I figured a lot of people need to hear more about. And he's interested in perhaps learning a bit about natural law, and I'm going to ask him some questions, and he's just going to, give his honest answers. I think he has a lot of great insight into the world, so I figured to do a little bit of an interview and have a show with him. So,
Okay, well, I'm the right Rican. I I started this channel. Actually, I've had the name for a while. I just actually started the posting content last year. Obviously, pandemic.
mhm.
And closer to the election, I love politics. I actually studied sociology in school, so that's
Mm,
my degree.
okay.
I had a minor in political science. So that's hence why that's most of the stuff I talk about in on my show is usually society and politics. But I also like to have interviews with people. I like to have conversations, just because I think people don't talk enough about, especially about politics in
Yeah.
general. Just because the fact that everyone wants to yell and everyone wants to fight and no one wants to listen.
Totally. No, I agree. And I think that's why it's important we do conversations like this. And we share different knowledge too that we each other have, right? Like there's certainly knowledge that you have that maybe I don't. I mean, you're definitely, you've gone many years longer than me, especially into this knowledge. So you probably have a lot of wisdom to share, and that's what we're here to do is open the conversation. You are the question. You can question me too, but I'm going to ask you a lot of questions because this is my way of also learning from you, and also to see where maybe we do have similarities because I believe we do. I think as human beings, regardless if you're left, right, whatever, we can come to understand generally some of these universal concepts that are here that if we understand, perhaps we can align our actions to these concepts, these universal laws, if you will, that help govern the consequences to our behavior. And that is what natural law is. It's actually laws that govern the consequences to our behavior. And I think more maybe as we explore this, you'll understand more about what I mean. So, what does that sound like to you so far?
We spoke about earlier. It's stuff that um, I've heard stuff about, like stuff like I said, like the non-aggression principle.
Right.
Where being more libertarian minded. Like I went on a show one time, and the guy, I felt bad because he introduced me as a fellow conservative,
Oh,
and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm, even though I know, let's say voting wise, I'm going to vote more on with the conservatives. I just don't consider myself a conservative because I'm more libertarian. I'm more. Uh, I would prefer for the government to leave me alone and
right.
let me do my thing. I prefer the freedom as opposed to, like the biggest example I use where I differ with the conservatives is the drug war. And
Hmm.
the drug war, it's been failed. I don't remember a time it was successful at all during my entire life.
Okay.
And it's something where I go, just legalize it, especially like marijuana, but at least at the bare minimum, decriminalize the hardest stuff, so like that we're not locking up uh, addicts, so like that they could get treatment as opposed to being put in prison, where
Hmm.
the irony of ironies, they could still get the drugs.
Right. Yeah, so this is interesting, and that's just why, like, I tend to, when it comes to like certain issues, I tend to go back to the question. I try to go back to the simplistics. I'm like, well, what are our rights to begin with? What can we impose on others? Should we impose anything on them? Like, we have questions that we need to ask ourselves, and I think So you're leaning more libertarian, and you came out of conservatism, or you're a libertarian. For what exact reasons do you define libertarianism, and why you particularly like it?
Well, I never came out of conservatism. I mean, I'm
Okay.
I'm Puerto Rican. I'm from New York,
Okay.
so I grew up, I grew up Democratic. So I mean, I grew up a Democrat growing up. It wasn't until I would say probably a little bit after 9/11,
Okay.
I got into Ron Paul,
Okay.
and I read a lot of his books, and Some I'm sure you're probably familiar with Alex Jones. I used to listen to Alex
Right.
Jones a lot. I was in my early 20s, and I used to listen to him. And Ron Paul was always on there, and he was one of the
Wow.
guests that always made the most sense to me.
Okay.
So like like in my book shelf, I have a lot of his books, like End of Fed. Trying to remember some of the other ones there. But that's the one that I just remember the most off the top of my head. But I have a couple of his books there that I just enjoyed, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where you could say the first time I was introduced to the non-aggression principle,
Okay.
and the whole thing about the government's really more there to protect your rights and not to enforce rights onto you. So there's
Yeah.
because there's positive rights and negative rights, and people, especially nowadays, people get that confused on
Hmm.
both sides of the aisle, not just one side, but both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really good thoughts. So you see rights as more of a thing that like the government needs to protect. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Um, so let's then. You want to start there? Let's try to define our rights.
yeah, we could go there.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good basis. I think for all these issues that we're talking about, and so let's start with like okay. So how do you think define a right? Now, if you don't like know exactly, and it's okay. I don't expect anyone to exactly know how to define a right, but how do you see a right as defined typically?
It's a complicated answer. What I could say is a right is not something that's given to you. A right is something that uh, it's something that you're born with. I would kind of say, like you.
Mm.
Um, I mean, when the founders found when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, we're created by our founders we're created with unalienable rights, meaning that something that shouldn't the government shouldn't be able to take away from us,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. Like we have a right to our life, we have a right to um, pursue for our pursuits,
Okay.
whether it's um, the right to work, the right to uh, to live in peace and all
So
that stuff.
you see
So
right as more of like an allowance, something that you are allowed to do.
um, I guess you could say I'm kind of going in that direction. I guess, um, but I think it's just I know it's more complicated than that, but
Okay.
that's what I would just
Sure.
simplify it into saying that, yeah, stuff that we're allowed. No, I shouldn't say allowed to do because that makes it sound like they could take it away from us. But no, I look at it more as stuff that you know God created us, and He great. If He wanted us to, if He wanted us to do things in a certain way, He wouldn't have given us free will.
Okay. So I
Because
think
I
I'll ask you a next challenging question. Free will, I think, is a good segue too into some of this. So do you think like right versus left politics has anything to do with when it comes to right and wrong action?
Yes and no, because it just
Okay.
depends on what you're talking about. Um, let's say for example, um, what's going on. Let's say with gender right now, where they're like, there's 69 20,000 genders, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's just wrong.
Right.
I'm not going to sit there and go, oh yeah, yeah, you may have a point. No, we're either XX or XY, and in some other cases, there's the double XY, or but those are rare the cases. So I go, no, there's male, female, and you know, but at the same time, I look at it as you do you. If when you're an adult and you want to do something to your body and all that stuff, that's fine. But let's say as a parent, as someone who has two kids, my job as a parent is to protect the kids even from themselves if I need be.
Right. Yeah. So people can decide what they want to do, right? Like, because they have the choice. It is free
Yeah.
will, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But is there, do you think, maybe an objective standard of right and wrong, and that's how we can perhaps define our rights?
Well, that's something that we have to come to an agreement. It's not something that, there's some things that we would need to define as right. Like we had spoken about before, like I said, about like, killing versus murder. And it's like, Some people think that, oh no, killing's wrong, and it's like, taking a life is bad, but taking a life senselessly, where someone, you just discriminately, randomly killing someone just
The
because,
intention you're looking at.
versus someone's coming to attack you, you have every right to defend yourself. You don't have to stay there and take it.
Hmm. So it's interesting, right? Because we use the word right a lot, right? It's in the Declaration of Independence, and you're using it here. And so I think that's why, like, I wanted to go to this, because this actually, if you want to learn about natural law, like, this is actually, like, at the heart of natural law. So, like, this is where we're going right into it. And that's why I wanted to jump right into it. So, here, I'm going to show you a slide, and you'll see morality. It's not right versus left, it's right versus wrong. And it's a distinction between right and wrong behavior. And it says it's at the heart of natural law. These are slides from a natural law teacher. His name is Mark Passio. And I could always share with you more resources, like on my website and stuff. But it's interesting because when I talk to a lot of people about rights, not always do they connect it to right versus wrong. But if you think about it, like even in the terms that you mentioned, you're like, well, you can do this and you can't do that. It sounds like, someone saying, well, this is wrong and this is right. And so it's interesting, like, is every time we put a law on somebody, are we telling them not to do something? Are we telling them not to do something right, or are we telling them not to do something that's actually wrong? Sometimes a law might not actually be right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of the our system, is the fact that you're not only supposed to, and they don't really teach you this too much, is with jury nullification, is you're not only supposed to be there to judge um, the crime, but you're also supposed to judge the law. And if you find that the law is unjust, then you're not supposed to convict. But they don't. They tell you, oh no, you're supposed to follow the letter of the law. No, because laws could be wrong.
Right. So interesting. Laws could be wrong. Now, the definition of law is something that's like immutable, universal, and applies everywhere. And so, like, what we call law today, if I'm introducing a concept called natural law, what do you think the laws that we do? What do you think? How could we compare, for example, natural law to then what is man's law?
Um, I would probably say that, let's say, natural law is more universal stuff that um, probably you could see across cultures.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would look at it. Something that, regardless if whether you're in the United States or you're in the Amazon, it's something that is applicable to anyone.
Interesting, right? And yeah, that's correct. I mean, according to the definition of natural law that everybody typically goes by when they use that word. And I even have a chart sort of showing the difference between natural law and man's law. And I'll show that to you in a second. But first, I'll show you this one chart that a lot of people use when they talk about this knowledge, and it compares right versus wrong. And they use this as a means to describe what our rights are, and knowing that our rights are things that are not wrong. And so it says, if you notice, it says a right is actions in it do not result in harm. So it's by saying what isn't, that's how you know what is. And so because something is not wrong, it's essentially a right, something you can do. So, like, for example, like let's name an example. Like, what do you think is an action that what is an action that is wrong, that you think is wrong?
Um, let's say rape.
Okay,
I
good.
think everybody could agree on rape.
Yeah, yeah. That's an example. So, like, let's look at that and let's observe that a little bit. So, why is it wrong? Well, if we look at this chart, well, actions based in wrongdoing, they result in harm to other sentient beings, something that is going to harm them. Now, when we use the word harm, we have to question that, right? Like, what are we looking at? So we're looking at our rights, and there's more to this. There's property rights. You ever hear about that term? So, like, what would be my property, for example?
Well, yeah, well, that's when you talk about property rights. Now that's when you get into the uh, that's what happened, with slavery. That's what happened
Mm-hmm.
with women
Right.
in the past, is that they were deemed property, as
Hmm.
opposed to, property to me shouldn't be a sentient being. Whether, another human being
Hmm.
shouldn't never be property.
Right.
Now I know there's people who'll take that even, further and go like animals, uh, but you know,
Would
how
you
you know,
say would you say that like your own body is your own property?
um, yeah, I'd say, um, in the physical being, yes, my body is my property. But then again, I am religious, so you know, my soul is a different story.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and if you notice, you might run into this when I go over these topics. It's like, well, it has sort of a religious undertone, right? Because you're looking at morality. Something that maybe if you're on the scientific point of view, you say, well, there is no such thing as objective morality. These laws don't come from God because God doesn't exist. You can make some ties with left brain type of scientific thinking. Um, as opposed to this more right brain perspective where we're looking at God and his laws. I'm not saying that we should have no science or saying that we should have all religion. I'm saying that perhaps maybe we need a balance of both, right? We need to think analytically, but also intuitively.
Absolutely agree with that. That's why, it's like I consider myself a Christian, but like the couple weeks ago, I had someone who's she's a spiritual guru
Hmm.
that I had her on, that, and she didn't even want to define her spirituality in terms of like one faith, because she practices, let's say, Hinduism and Buddhism, and she took a little bit of everything to make it
Hmm.
her own. And so, and I respect her for that. I may
Right.
not necessarily agree with everything that she talked about, but if you look back there, we had a great conversation. Even if there's stuff that I was in my mind, I questioned her about. But you have to let people express themselves. You got to give them that opportunity, because um, religion and spirituality is something that, I can't believe that there's not a God. That's just in me. I can never believe being atheist. I could understand you not believing in the God of Christianity, in the God of Islam, the God of Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, all of the religions out there. I could understand you not wanting
Hmm.
to believe in one of those faiths,
Right.
but I can't understand someone not believing in God, because ultimately science, there's a question that where we came from, and well, I don't think we'll ever be able to answer that.
Right. Well, I think these laws also point to that creator if you think about it, right? Because these laws come from the creator. And there's certain expressions and principles that make up these laws. For example, mentalism, which is the idea that everything is created in the mind. Our mind becomes our thoughts, and those thoughts become our actions, and our actions become the world around us. And so that's how we can essentially change the world, is by changing the minds of people. And even like people like Benjamin Franklin would state, well, the only sure reliance to the preservance of our liberty is to change the minds, is to educate the populace, to have them know what freedom is so they don't lose it. And I say the same thing about rights. Is like if you don't know your rights definitively for what they are, I mean, you might lose your rights, right? Other people might violate them, or they're going to trick you into thinking, well, maybe it's under what rights they give you. Can somebody really give you your rights?
And that's the whole thing. That's the problem that's going on. That's why, um, what I do is some of the things where I talk about where, you'll get people who are like, oh, you have the right to health care, and you have
Mm.
the right to, you have the right to a living wage, and you have a right to child care, and
Hmm.
and it's like, you don't understand. If you have to take it from someone else to give it to someone else, then it's not a right, because that means then your right is superseding somebody else's right.
Right. Yeah.
So they can't be both right at the same time. Someone has to be wrong.
Hmm. So essentially, like you're saying, well, your rights come from God, right?
As a Christian, I go, yeah, my rights. That's how I do ultimately feel, is my rights do come from God.
See, now
The
this is
government.
this is where natural law comes in, right? Because like we're defining our rights under law. These are God's laws or nature's laws, however you want to see it. And these laws, if we understand them, we can understand our rights. And if we can change the minds of people, then we can essentially change our actions and we can change the world. And that's why I teach this knowledge, like just to let you know, right? That this is why I see the value in it. It's because I'm defining what makes up freedom and those aspects that are in the Declaration of Independence.
No, yeah, no, even though it's like, okay, how do I get this out to make it people understand what I'm trying to say? But it's a great conversation to have because of that. I think people don't see that what's going on. We get the media tells us what our rights are, and government officials tell us what our rights are, and at the end of the day, it's like, no, that's not. The great thing that the founding fathers did, they laid a document out that said, okay, we have our rights, these are our rights, and the government, you don't get them from the government, we don't give it to you, well, because the whole thing is like people argue whether they were Christian or not, but at the end of the day, they were not atheists. Like
Mm-hmm.
some people will show that quotes that they were anti-Christian, Christianity, but at the end of the day, they were theists,
Mm-hmm.
which means they believed in God.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they saw that our rights are not government given. Because
Right.
this is what I always tell my friends. My friends on the left, I tell them, all this stuff that you're asking for the government to give you, a government that's powerful enough to give you that stuff is powerful enough to take it away.
Right. So,
That's why we're going to be careful.
and I think where we maybe differ or we have different understandings is right because you knew like I talk about statism, and I go
Hmm.
into some of the depths of, well, what is it? Where do we breach our own natural rights and give it away to somebody else? Where is it when we say, okay, I'm not responsible for my own being, I don't own myself, and that somebody is above the law, natural law, to claim what rights I do not and do not have, or telling me what to do with my life instead of me.
I
So
think that's when you create a compact. That's what it's basically what the Constitution was supposed to be,
a
is a
contract?
compact,
Oh, a compact.
contract between people, and that's when you do give them, let's say for example, um, I may be a lousy farmer, but I could build shelves. So it's like, okay, so I can't do everything. So you as the farmer, you don't have the time to build your shelves. Okay, you do your farming. I'll go build your shelves. You hook me up with food, and we're both good.
That sounds good to me. You know why? Because it's a voluntary interaction and it's an actual contract. A
Hmm.
contract is between two individuals and they decide, yes, we're both going to do this. But did I consent to the Constitution?
No, in the sense that no, because you were born into it.
Mm-hmm.
So you as an individual, no, but basically your ancestors, you know, brought you here, whether you're, an immigrant or you're,
Right.
which most of us are.
So
Um,
it's not really then a contract, like, because I'm not signing on to it, right? But I was born into it and somehow presupposed into this condition. Um,
yes.
and I respect, the freedoms that we have as Americans, on this land, that we recognize more of those natural laws that are present from the foundation of America. But do you think
Hmm.
that is the end all? Because, I mean, look at where we are today. Clearly, things didn't end up so well. And how do you think things really ended up being the way it is? So we recognize natural law, but how come that didn't really do us any good?
Honestly, I think is if you look at what's gone on, it's funny that people talk about, you were talking about morality there,
Mm-hmm.
and I think um, that's what's gone on. I think people have lost the sense of morality. People have also
Hmm.
forget that we're just people. So
Right.
people are going to screw up. We're imperfect beings.
Hmm.
So people expect, like, they'll go, oh, well, the US, we're so horrible and we're so horrible. And it's like, Go to Venezuela and see how communism and socialism works, like
Yeah.
real communism and socialism.
Mm.
You you don't have that same choice. I mean, I've met people who've refugees from Venezuela, and they were so grateful to come here and see how things. Are we perfect? Can we? Can you improve? Anybody can improve. There's no such thing as a perfect. I mean, the fact that we're imperfect beings mean that we're gonna create imperfect governments, in imperfect institutions.
Or maybe, that's part of the reason why we shouldn't create those institutions, right? So, I mean, there's question, right? There's question because you know
Of
where I
course,
stand.
no. I mean, no. I understand where like I said, like I said, I have my friend in Texas that he always talks in terms of statism, and it's something where I go, um, ideally, if we were perfect people, we wouldn't need to create those institutions either.
So,
But I do, um,
I see.
some living in a world where let's say for example, we talked about that we just talked about that voluntary contract.
Hmm.
Well, guess what, let's say we created that voluntary contract. I created my the shelves for the farmer, but he decides not to give me the food that he promised me. Who's going to enforce that contract?
Well, if he can't deliver back, the contract is null. It's void. It's not gonna go
Yeah,
on.
but I already built the shelves in his let's say in his at his house. What I'm going to do, take him out?
Well, he has a. Well, it's like nowadays, right? If somebody does not promise to do something for me, what am I going to do? Am I going to get the state to to force them to do something for me? No, I'm going to
Well,
seek peacefully resolutions, as most people will
mhm.
want to. And, it's their responsibility to deliver their promise, but hey, they might forget or they might not want to, and I can't really do much about their own decision. What am I going to do? Force them by threat of violence to do something I want them to do?
Oh well, no, I understand what you're saying with
Hmm.
that, but you do need some sort of um you do need some sort of force in that sense to go, okay, you then maybe I am going to go to your house and destroy the shelves, and because if you're not giving me my food, why should I you keep my shelves?
So, okay, so you built shelves, right? I'm trying to get this right.
Oh no, my example was that I built shelves for the farmer because I need food, and with the voluntary contract that we were talking about before,
Hmm.
that
I mean,
it's
it's voluntary, so like it's not it's not guaranteed, but it's something that you made between somebody else, and I can do that on a day to day basis.
of course. I think in an ideal situation, and in a utopia, what would just happen would be that person would get a bad reputation and no one would trust them.
Well,
That
that wouldn't that
that would be the
happen though in
consequence.
the real world is if somebody doesn't do something and it's your neighbor or somebody you know and they're not promising, obviously you're not going to have a good reputation with that person. I mean,
No, no, that's my yeah.
yeah.
No, you're
Well,
definitely not
I
going to have a
just
good
don't think we
reputation.
need utopia for that. I think, in fact, because we don't have a utopia, it teaches us right from wrong. Think about it, right? Like, if we have bad things, like we showed in the diagram, we tend to know then what is a good thing because chaos is a teacher. And I think, just because freedom includes possibility, and possibility includes the possibility of chaos, we shouldn't fear freedom because of the fear of chaos. Do you see what I mean? So when you say, okay, we need a little bit of force to justify these means, this is where we get objective with morality and say, well, when is it ever justified to use violence to force somebody to do something that they don't want to do themselves? You see what I mean?
No, I understand what you're saying, but like I said, I think if if we're always going to go on a what's the word I'm looking for, a buddy system, so to speak, then then you can't necessarily have real commerce, because then if you're going by a system where you know what, I could feel like paying you, I could feel like giving you what I promised you this time, you know and you may get a shady reputation, but you're still, people are still going to use you and all that stuff. Where I think like I said, if you this is something that a group of people, you have to make that contract. You guys have to make that pact to join together, and you guys. that's where these laws come into play. That's
Man's
it's not
law?
something where, huh?
Man's law?
Man's law.
Okay.
That's where man laws comes into play. It's like, okay, if we're gonna live in this society, we have these rules. You do have, you know, if you want those kind of natural laws, then you probably need to create your own society.
Yeah, it's okay. If you want to get water, go ahead. Get something to
No, I
drink.
was just looking. I usually do have water here, so I was looking about. Uh, yeah, hold on. Give me
Yeah,
one
no problem,
second.
man. It's all good. It's important people hydrate.
Like I said, I usually do have it right there, but I actually have it off camera. Well, I normally have it off camera, like off camera over right to the next to me. But
Here, while you're drinking, I'll share with you something that you might like. So this is something we share in this natural law community called the law of freedom. And it states that freedom and morality are directly proportional. And if you look at many different civilizations of the past, you saw that as morality declined, freedom declined, or as freedom declined, morality declined. So what this law is stating is that they both increase and decrease together. That's what it means when it says directly proportional. And so it also states that the presence of truth and morality existent in any one nation or society is inversely proportional to the amount of tyranny and slavery. So the fact that we live in a society today where I think most people can generally agree we have a lot of tyranny and a lot of slavery, and that's why we're having conversations like this, it makes us want to bring moralities up to the surface, or bring God up to the surface, or bring truth to the surface because of the presence of tyranny and slavery that is present. So
because I think also
yeah.
the nature of man makes it that's why we need, um, like you were talking about with a divine law, or
Mm-hmm.
God's law, because the fact that people are, like I said earlier, people are imperfect, so you need that. That's why you need, that's why I say that's why
So
we
we
need
need
God.
imperfect people to fix imperfect people.
No, that's why I said we need God.
Okay, yeah.
Because yeah, because we're none of us is perfect.
Right. But you did say that we need certain people to do certain things for others. And like I said, I'm open to this conversation, so and I appreciate you for being open to everything here. But I'm going to challenge you a little bit because this is like, essential for this.
But that's, hey, I no worries about it.
But like, what? First of all, we can't grant rights to somebody to say, well, they are the ones who have to be in charge, and they're the ones who are going to decide something. Because again, our rights come from God. And then we also established that man's law is never universal. It's not eternal, and we're not bound to it. So it's always essentially doomed to fail one way or another. And then we also established man is by nature imperfect, and that everything he does is not going to be perfect, and thus it's always going to result in harm. And so, do you see how we have a lot of problems with man's law and the nature of using violence to justify a means of good when violence is never good, period, by morality?
Oh, yes and no, because it's not violence itself that's necessarily, um, good or bad. It could be, let's say, tragic. Like I said, if someone's coming to attack me, I'm gonna have to use violence to defend myself.
Right. So,
That's not
yeah,
that
let's
doesn't
talk
make
about
it
that.
that doesn't make it wrong,
Okay.
because uh, you know it's I have to do it. I'd be wrong if I didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. So let's go over that real quick then, because I actually there's a good slide for that exact thing that you're talking about. I think it's just it puts it into good perspective for what we're talking about. So it's force versus violence, because a lot of people equate the two, and we use this as a means to show the difference between self-defense and the active use of violence. And yeah, you can read that if you want, if you can see it. I'll read it
Yeah,
for
I'm
you
like,
as well.
okay.
So force is the capacity to do work or cause physical change, energy, strength, or active power. It is action which is in harmony with morality and natural law because it does not violate others' rights. Hence the word violate as in violence, right?
Sure.
So action which is one always possesses the right to take, which includes the defense against violence. So force is the exact opposite of violence. It is when we choose to do things with good capacity, whether it be physical or, like it says, any amount of energy, strength, or power to try to defend ourselves, I think is the best example. And violence is the immoral initiation of physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain. So telling somebody what to do, in a sense, and forcing them to go along with it. By force, I mean violence, okay? But you're applying force in a negative connotation because now you're making people comply. So it's coercive action, which is in opposition to morality and natural law because it involves the violation of others' rights. So every type of violation of someone's rights is a form of theft, like you mentioned rape, right? It's the theft of sexual choice or the theft of somebody's own freedom. And every form of
Tax is
wrongdoing.
the theft of someone's income.
Yes, yeah, right. And that's taxation as well. And although we put it under a certain banner of a certain name, it doesn't change the nature of what that thing is. Just because someone says, well, I have the right to take money from you, they never had that right. They decide that for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's called moral relativism, where we can decide for ourselves what right and wrong is, and there is no objective right or wrong. Again, it's saying that natural law is essentially useless. It's like saying natural law doesn't exist, even though it always does, because people wouldn't purposely do bad things to one another. They know they would likely receive wrong in return. And that's why natural law is also called moral law or karmic law, like karma. It's also called the law of attraction, because what you attract is what you get. And it's also called the golden rule, like it teaches in literally every religion, which is not to do harm to somebody. Otherwise, you're going to receive harm back. You wouldn't do to somebody what you wouldn't want done to you. But yet, certain people do feel like they have, the special privilege to do certain things that other people are not allowed to do. So, do we see the sort of deception we put ourselves under? This is ourselves, our own doing, where we feel
Yeah,
like
of
other
course.
people can do that.
Yeah, because I think it's. I want to look at it as the parental paradox. Since I'm a parent,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, it's like teaching a kid not to be you, because it's like you want your kid to be, independent. You want them to be so many different things, but then at the same time, they drive you crazy, and you you want to stop them from, doing certain things. You want to stop them from hurting themselves. Um, so it's. I think that's what it is. Sometimes we. Um, this is what I call. This is what I talk about also, and other people talk about when it comes to like communism, and like communism doesn't work, and why communism doesn't work is because at the end of the day, people always go, "Oh, but if I was the dictator, I would be, I would be the benevolent big dictator." And it's like,
Right.
no, you wouldn't be, because once you have that type of power, you lose sight of um, the big picture.
Hmm.
You can't, like we're talking, with the examples that we're talking about. Um, there's, we're talking about two actions. You know,
Right.
one or two. But you're talking about when you're doing stuff like what we're like, this conversation that we're having now. It's multiple interactions. They're gonna have multiple different interactions, different choices, different paths to go to. So um, it's not as black and white.
Okay.
Mhm.
But morality is subjective, right? So there is a difference between right or wrong.
Yes, no.
Okay.
That's not what I. Yeah, no. I was trying to.
Yeah.
I guess I was trying to say what you were talking about when you're talking about moral um,
Relativism.
relativism.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, I understand
Yeah.
totally. A lot of if you know much about like Satanism, it actually talks a lot about just choosing what we can do as human beings, regardless of God, regardless of those laws, and we can just do whatever we want, right? Like we can change somebody's genetics, turn them into whatever we want. Eugenics, eugenicism. It
Hmm.
including like a lot of the transgenderism and stuff that you talked about before. It kind of fits into that agenda where we get to be God, right? We are trying to be God and rule over other beings and telling them what to do or convincing them to do it themselves, even though it's wrong to do.
Yeah, the coercion.
Right. So, and although I said I didn't consent necessarily to the Constitution, I was born in this country and I do pay taxes and I contribute to such a system. So, there's a question of, what am I feeding into? What am I feeding into the system? And that's what creates its existence. Because
Yes.
if I weren't to give it my if I said, well, you aren't my authority, I don't want you ruling over me, I'm not going to do anything that you tell me to do, perhaps then I'm truly sovereign. Perhaps then I'm truly free, because now nobody's telling me what to do in that regard. I am in control of my own life. And what I choose to get myself into is voluntary interactions, which is also an expression of freedom. Only in freedom, again, do you have possibilities. So only then you have choice. Without freedom, you don't have choice. And I think when you mentioned about communism and stuff, I mean, you see it there very evidently. People have less of a choice for themselves, but they're convinced that maybe some choice is better for the greater good, they say.
Exactly. It's like, what's the joke? The joke is, if you want to see how communism works, look in a supermarket.
Okay.
So it's like, if you want to talk about freedom of choice, you got Coke, Pepsi, no frills,
No,
you
you're
go
right.
to
That's
a communist supermarket, and it's whatever the party's product is, if they have it. That's why I was talking about Venezuela, where
like the illusion of choice.
The illusion of choice.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, let's leave it there.
Okay, sure.
Maybe can we cut it off here, just because?
Sure.
My daughter's quiet, and that worries me.
All right, yeah. So we'll make sure to do that for sure. I thank you for talking with me so far. We could always continue this, because usually I say every time, like, our shows are always limited to like 3 or 4 max per guest. So if you ever want to come back on and talk more about this, I'll also share resources with you after the show. But hopefully I introduce a bit of different information that's more along the lines of, like, this is self-ownership, and we don't need a government to rule over us. And although it might sound harsh, I mean, I say government is slavery because I know it is so, by its enactment of saying, well, you have certain rights and you have to obey, otherwise you're going to be punished. And I even have charts diagramming this. I have quotes from many slaves. You'll see, like, this slide I have on the screen here. I'll move it into focus. Like, this one has like quotes from former slaves, and then I have a whole list of the arguments people make for slavery are the same exact arguments people make for government. And although this might sound extreme, I'm no communist. I'm a real anarchist. People who call themselves anarchists, they tend to be communists, actual communists, and they still promote government.
That I do know the difference, because you have like like the Black Bloc in Portland are not anarchists. Sometimes they'll call them anarchists, and it's like, no, those are not anarchists.
Yeah. Well,
those
because
are fascists.
Anarchon means no rulers. It doesn't mean no rules.
Yeah.
And that's why I talk about natural law, because people think there'll be like lawlessness, but like people said the same thing when it was about freeing the slaves. Oh my gosh, if we free the slaves, they're going to run amok, and what are we going to do? Who's going to pick the cotton? Who's going to build the roads? And all the same exact excuses. We have to reevaluate our questioning and our conditions, because we're born in a very young age about obedience. So I thank you for coming on. I won't waste any more of your time, but at least hopefully maybe I planted some ideas in your head to get you thinking.
Let me give me like 10 minutes, so like that I could go check on her, and then we'll cross record.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
All right.
Do you want me to just wrap up my show real quick for everyone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're the right Rican. Follow him on YouTube. I'll have all his links in the description below, and you can go do your thing. I'll put you off screen. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna sign back onto Zoom.
Got you. You're muted, so don't worry. Okay. All right, sure. So thank you everybody for watching. If you watch this live, or you are watching the recording on the One Great Work Network, or on my YouTube channel, or any of my other channels, thank you always for watching. We need to open this discussion to people who may not always agree. It's always about not staying in our echo chambers. It's always about seeking out new ideas and bringing it to new people. It's never a bad thing. It's innovation. In order to innovate, you have to challenge an existing idea, introduce new ideas, and say, well, we can emerge better than this. We can be better than ever if we challenge our pre-existing ideas and we say, well, maybe there's something that's even better than this. So although the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, recognizes our rights, we need to define what those rights are, especially if we want to go back to understanding the same things that they understood, and maybe even go even farther now with the advances advances of technology, looking back at history, looking at what the governments have done in the world, the nature of government seen over time as truth. This all allows us to understand our humanity, our nature, and the nature of government, the nature of our world. And that's why I say nature is the answer. Remember, you are the question. Your actions is what's going to affect the world around us. Thank you for watching. This is Corey. I've been Nature is the answer.